Chapter 81. The Pequod Meets the Virgin. The predestined day arrived, and we duly met the ship Jungfrau, Derek de Deer, master of Bremen. At one time the greatest whaling people in the world, the Dutch and Germans are now among the least. But here and there, at very wide intervals of latitude and longitude, you still occasionally meet with their flag in the Pacific. For some reason, the Jungfrau seemed quite eager to pay her respects. While yet some distance from the Pequod, she rounded to, and, dropping a boat, her captain was impelled toward us, impatiently standing in the bows instead of the stern. "What has he in his hand there?" cried Starbuck, pointing to something wavingly held by the German. "Impossible! A lamp feeder!" "Not that," said Stubb. No, it's a coffee pot, Mr. Starbuck. He's coming off to make us our coffee. It's the Yarman. Don't you see that big tin can there alongside of him? That's his boiling water. Oh, he's all right, is the Yarman." "Go along with you," cried Flask. "It's a lamp feeder in an oil can. He's out of oil, has come a beggin'." How curious it may seem for an oil ship to be borrowing oil on whale ground, and however much it may be invertedly contradict the old proverb about carrying coals to Newcastle. Yet sometimes such a thing really happens, and in the present case Captain Derek de Deer did indubitably conduct a lamp feeder as Flask did declare. As he mounted the deck, Ahab abruptly accosted him, without at all heeding what he had in his hand. But in his broken lingo, the German soon evinced his complete ignorance of the white whale, immediately turning the conversation to his lamp feeder and oil can, with some remarks touching to his having to turn into his hammock at night in profound darkness, his last drop of Bremen oil being gone, and not a single flying fish yet captured to supply the deficiency. Concluding by hinting that the ship was indeed in the fishery is technically called a clean one, that is, an empty one, well deserving the name of Jungfrau, or the Virgin. His necessities supplied, Derek departed, but he had not gained his ship's side when the whales were almost simultaneously raised from the mastheads of both vessels. And so eager for the chase was Derek that, without pushing to put his oil can and lamp feeder aboard, he slewed round his boat and made after the Leviathan lamp feeders. Now, the game having risen to the leeward, he and the 3 other German boats soon followed him, and had considerable the start of the Pequod's keels. There were 8 whales, an average pod. Aware of their danger, they were all going abreast with great speed, straight before the wind, rubbing their flanks as closely, so as many spans of horses in the harness. They left a great wide wake, as though continually unrolling a great wide parchment upon the sea. Full in this rapid wake, and many fathoms in the rear, swam a huge, humped old bull, which, by his comparatively slow progress, as well as the unusual yellowish incrustations growing over him, seemed afflicted with jaundice or some other infirmity. Whether this whale belonged to the pod in advance seemed questionable, for it is not customary for such a venerable leviathans to be at all social. Nevertheless, he stuck to their wake, though, indeed, their backwater must have retarded him, because the whalebone or swell, his broad muzzle was a dashed one, like a swell forming when 2 hostile currents meet. His spout was short, slow, and laborious, coming forth with a choking sort of gush, and spending itself in torn shreds, followed by strange subterranean commotions in him, which seemed to have egress at his other buried extremity, causing the waters behind him to upbubble. "Who's got some paregoric?" said Stubb. "He has a stomach ache, I'm afraid. Lord, thinking of having half an acre of stomach ache. Adverse winds are holding mad Christmas in 'em, boy. It's the first foul wind I've ever known to blow from astern. But look, did ever whale yaw so before? It must be he's lost his tiller." As an overladen Indiaman bearing down on the Hindustan coast with a deck-load of frightened horses, careens, berries, rolls, and wallows on her way, so did this old whale heave his aged bulk, and now and then, partly turning over on his cumbrous ribbons, expose the cause of his devious wake in the unnatural stump of his starboard fin. Whether he had lost that fin in battle or been born without it, it were hard to say. "Only wait a bit, old chap, and I'll give ye a sling for that wounded arm," cried cruel Flask, pointing to the whale lying near him. "Mind he don't sling thee with it," cried Starbuck. "Give way, or the German will have him." With one intent, all the combined rival boats were pointed for this one fish, because not only was he the largest and therefore most valuable whale, but he was nearest to them, and the other whales were going with such great velocity, moreover, almost to defy pursuit at the time. At this juncture, the Pequod's keels had shot by the 3 German boats last lowered, but from the great start he had, Derek's boat still led the chase, though every moment neared by his foreign rivals. The only thing they feared was that, from being already so nigh to his mark, he would be enabled to dart his iron before they would completely overtake and pass him. As for Derek, he seemed quite confident that this would be the case, and occasionally with a deriding gesture shook his lamp feeder at the other boats. "The ungracious and ungrateful dog," cried Starbuck. "He mocks and dares me with the very poor box I filled for him not 5 minutes ago." Then in his old intense whisper, "Give way, greyhounds, dog to it." "I tell ye what it is, men," cried Stubb to his crew, "it's against my religion to get mad, but I'll like to eat that villainous Yarman. Pull, won't ye? Are ye going to let the rascal beat ye? Do ye love brandy? A hogshead of brandy, then, to the best man. Come, why don't some of ye burst a blood vessel? Who's that been dropping anchor overboard? We don't budge an inch, we're becalmed. Halloo, there's grass growing in the boat's bottom, and by the Lord the mast looks budding. This won't do, boys. Look at the Yarman. The short and long of it is, men, will ye spite fire or not?" "Oh, see the suds he makes," cried Floss, dancing up and down. "What a hump! Oh, do pile on the beef, lays like a log. Oh, my lads, do spring. Slapjacks and quahogs for supper, you know, my lads. Baked clams and muffins. Oh, do spring. She's 100-barreler. Don't lose her now. Don't. See the Yarman. Oh, you won't pull your duff, my lad. Such a sog. You're such a sogger. Do you love sparm? There goes the $3,000, men. A bank, a whole bank, the Bank of England. Oh, do. What's that Yarman about now?" At this moment, Derek was in the act of pitching his lamp feeder at the advancing boats, and also his oil can, perhaps with the double view of retarding his rival's way, and at the same time economically accelerating his own by the momentary impetus of the backwards toss. "The unmannerly Dutch dogger," cried Stubb. "Pull now, men, like 50,000 line of battleship loads of red-haired devils. What do you say, Tashtego? Are you the man to snap your spine in 22 places for the honor of old Gayhead? What do you say?" "I say pull like goddamn," cried the Indian. Fiercely, but evenly incited by the taunts of the German, the Pequod's 3 boats began ranging almost abreast, and, so disposed, momentarily neared him. In that fine, loose, chivalrous attitude of the headsman when drawing near to his prey, the 3 mates stood proudly, occasionally backing after the oarsman with an exhilarating cry of, "There she slides now! Hurrah for the white ash breeze! Down with the Yarman! Sail over 'em!" But so decidedly an original start had Derek had that, in spite of all their gallantry, he would have proved the victor in this race, had not a righteous judgment descended upon him in a crab, which caught the blade of his midship oar. While this clumsy lubber was striving to free his whitish, and while inconsequent Derek's boat was nigh to capsizing, he thundered away at his men in a mighty rage. That was a good time for Starbuck, Stubb, and Flask. With a shout, they took up a mortal start forwards, and, slanting, ranged up on the German's quarter. An instant more, and all 4 boats were diagonally in the whale's immediate wake, while stretching from them, on both sides, was the forming swell he made. It was terrific, most pitiable and maddening sight. The whale was now going head out and sending his spout before him in a continual tormented jet, while his one poor fin beat his side in an agony of fright. Now to this hand, now to that, he yawed in faltering flight. And still, at every billow that he broke, he spasmodically sank in the sea, or sideways rolled towards the sky with his one beating fin. So I have seen a bird with a clipped wing making a frightened broken circles in the air, vainly striving to escape the piratical hawks. But the bird has a voice, and with the plaintive cries will make known her fear. But the fear of this vast dumb brood of the sea was chained up and enchanted in him. He had no voice, save that choking respiration through his spiracle, and this made the sight of him unspeakably pitiable, while still, in his amazing bulk, portcullis jaw, and omnipotent tail, there was enough to appall the stoutest man who so pitied. Seeing now that but a few moments more would give the Pequod's boats the advantage, and rather than thus be foiled of his game, Derek chose to hazard what to him must have seemed a most unusually long dart, ere the last chance would ever escape. But no sooner did his harpooner stand up for the stroke than all three tigers, Queequeg, Tashtego, and Daggoo, instinctively sprang to their feet, and, standing in a diagonal row, simultaneously pointed their barbs and darted over the head of the German harpooner. Their 3 Nantucket irons entered the whale, blinding vapors of foam and white fire. The 3 boats, in the first fury of the whale's headlong rush, bumped the Germans aside with such force that both Derek and his baffled harpooner were spilled out and sailed over by the 3 flying keels. "Don't be afraid, my butterboxes," cried Stubb, casting a passing glance on them as he shot by. "You'll be picked up presently, by all right. I saw some sharks astern. St. Bernard's dogs, you know. Relieve distressed travelers. Hurrah! This is the way to sail now. Every keel a sunbeam. Hurrah! Here we go, like 3 tin kettles in the tail of a mad cougar. This puts me in mind of fastening to an elephant at a Tilbury on the plain. Makes the wheel spokes fly, boy, when you fasten to 'em that way. And there's a danger of being pitched out, too, when you strike a hill. Hurrah! This is the way a fellow feels when he's going down to Davy Jones. All a rush down an endless inclined plane. Hurrah! This whale carries the everlasting mail." But the monster's run was but a brief one. Giving a sudden gasp, he tumultuously sounded with a grating rush. 3 lines flew round the loggerheads with such force as to gouge deep grooves in them, while so fearful were the harpooners that this rapid sounding would soon exhaust the lines, that they used their dexterous might. They caught repeatedly smoking turns of the rope to hold on, till at last, owing to the perpendicular strain from the lead-lined chocks of the boats, whence the 3 ropes went straight down into the blue, the gunwales of the boats were almost even with the water, while the 3 sterns tilted high in the air, and, the whale soon ceasing to sound, for some time they remained in that attitude, fearful of expending more line, though the position was a little ticklish. But though boats have been taken down and lost in this way, yet it is this holding on, as it is called, this hooking up by the sharp barbs of his live flesh from the back. This is that often torments the Leviathan into soon rising again to meet the sharp lance of his foes. Yet not to speak of the peril of the thing, it is to be doubted whether this course is always the best. For it is but reasonable to presume that the longer the stricken whale stays under water, the more he is exhausted, because, owing to the enormous surface of him, and a full-grown sperm whale something less than 2,000 square feet, the pressure of the water is immense. We all know what an astonishing atmospheric weight we ourselves stand up under, even here above ground in the air. How vast then the burden of a whale bearing on his back the column of 200 fathoms of ocean. It must at least equal the weight of 50 atmospheres. One whaleman has estimated it at the weight of 20 line of battleships with all their guns, stores, and men on board. As the 3 boats lay there on that gently rolling sea, gazing down its eternal blue noon, and as not a single groan or cry of any sort, nay, not so much as a ripple or a bubble came up from its depths, what landsman would have thought that beneath all the silence and placidity, the utmost monster of the seas was writhing and wrenching in agony. Not 8 inches of perpendicular rope were visible at the bows. Seems it credible that by 3 such thin threads the great Leviathan was suspended like a big weight on an 8-day clock? Suspended? To what? To 3 bits of board? Is this creature of whom it was once so triumphantly said, "Canst thou fill his skin with barbed irons, or his head with fish spears?" The sword of him that layeth at him cannot hold, the spear, the dart, nor the habergeon. He esteemeth iron as straw, the arrow cannot make him flee. Darts are counted as stubble, he laugheth at the shaking of a spear. This creature, this he, oh, this unfulfillment should follow the prophets. For with the strength of 1,000 thighs on his tail, Leviathan had run his head under the mountains of the sea, to hide him from the Pequod's fierce fish spears. In that sloping afternoon sunlight, the shadows that the three boats sent down beneath the surface must have been long enough and broad enough to shade half of Xerxes' army. Who can tell how appalling to the wounded whale must have been such huge phantoms flitting over his head? "Stand by, men, he stirs," cried Starbuck as the three lines suddenly vibrated in the water, distinctly conducting upwards to them as if by magnetic wires, the life and death throbs of the whale, so that every oarsman felt them in his seat. The next moment, relieved in great part from the downward strain at the bows, the boats gave a sudden bounce upward, as a small ice field will when a dense herd of white bears are scared from it into the sea. Haul in, cried Starbuck, he's rising." The lines of which, hardly an instant before, not one hand's breadth could have been gained, were now in long, quick coils flung back, all dripping into the boats, and soon the whale broke water within 2 ships' lengths of the hunters. His motions plainly denoted his extreme exhaustion. In most land animals there are certain valves or floodgates in many of their veins, whereby, when wounded, the blood is in some degree at least instantly shut off in certain directions. Not so with the whale, one of those whose peculiarities is to have the entire non-valvular structure of the blood vessels, so that when pierced by even so small a point as a harpoon, a deadly drain is at once begun upon his whole arterial system, and when this heightened by the extraordinary pressure of the water at great distance below the surface, his life may be said to pour from him in incessant streams. Yet so vast is the quantity of blood in him, and so distant and numerous its interior fountains, that he will thus keep bleeding and bleeding for a considerable period, even as in a drought a river will flow whose source is in the well springs of a far off and indiscernible hills. Even now, when the boats pulled upon this whale and perilously drew over his swaying flukes, and the lancers were darted into him, they were followed by steady jets from the new-made wound, which kept continually playing, while the natural spout hole in his head was only at intervals, however rapid, sending its affrighted moisture into the air. From this last vent no blood yet came, because no vital part of him had thus far been struck. His life, as they significantly call it, was untouched. As the boats now more closely surrounded him, the whole upper part of his form, which much of it, that is, ordinarily submerged, was plainly revealed. His eyes, or rather the blood brought the places where his eyes had been, were beheld. As strange mist-grown masses gather in the knot-holes of the noblest oaks when prostrate, so from the points in which a whale's eyes had once occupied now protruded blind bulbs, horribly pitiable to see. But pity there was none, for all his old age and his one arm and his blind eyes, he must die the death and be murdered, in order to light the gay bridals and other merrymakings of men, and also to illuminate the solemn churches that preach unconditional inoffensiveness by all to all. Still rolling in his blood, at last he partially disclosed a strangely discolored bunch or protuberance the size of a bushel, low down on the flank. "A nice spot," cried Flask, "just let me prick him there once." "Avast," cried Starbuck, "there's no need of that." But humane Starbuck was too late. At the last instant the dart of the ulcerous jet shot from the cruel wound, and goaded by it into more than sufferable anguish, the whale now spouted thick blood with swift fury, blindingly darted at the craft, bespattering them and their glorying crews all over with showers of gore, capsizing Flask's boat and marring the bows. It was his death stroke, for by this time so spent was he by loss of blood that he helplessly rolled away from the wreck he made, lay panting on his side, impotently flapped with his stumped fin, then over and over slowly revolved like a waning world, turned up the white secrets of his belly, lay like a log, and died. It was most piteous, that last expiring spout, as when by unseen hands the water is gradually drawn off from some mighty fountain, and with the half-stifled melancholy gurglings the spray column lowers and lowers to the ground. So at last the long-dying spout of the whale. Soon, while the crews were awaiting the arrival of the ship, the body showed symptoms of sinking with all its treasures unrifled. Immediately, by Starbuck's orders, lines were secured to it at different points, so that ere long every boat was a buoy, the sunken whale being suspended a few inches beneath them by the cords. By very heedful management, when the ship drew nigh, the whale was transferred to her side, and was strongly secured there with the stiffest fluke chains. For it was plain that unless artificially upheld, the body would at once sink to the bottom. It so chanced that almost upon the first cutting into him with the spade, the entire length of a corroded harpoon was found embedded in his flesh, on the lower part of the bunch before described. But as the stumps of harpoons are frequently found in the dead bodies of captured whales, with the flesh perfectly healed around them, and no prominence of any kind to denote their place, therefore there must needs have been some other unknown reason in the present case to fully account for the ulceration alluded to. But still more curious was the fact of a lance head of stone being found in him, not far from the buried iron, the flesh perfectly formed around it. Who had darted that stone lance, and when? And it might have been darted by some Northwest Indian long before America was discovered. What other marvels might have been rummaged out of this monstrous cabinet there is no telling. But a sudden stop was put to further discoveries by the ship being unprecedentedly dragged over sideways to the sea, owing to the body's immensely increasing tendency to sink. However, Starbuck, who had ordered the ordering of affairs, hung on to it on the last, hung on to it so resolutely indeed, that when the length of the ship would have been capsized if still persisted in locking arms with the body. Then, when the command was given to break clear from it, such was the immovable strain among the timber heads to when the fluke chains and cables were fastened, that it was impossible to cast them off. Meantime, everything in the Pequod was aslant. To cross to the other side of the deck was like walking up the steep gabled roof of a house. The ship groaned and gasped. Many of the ivory inlayings in her bulwarks and cabins were started from their places by unnatural dislocation. In vain, handspikes and crows were brought to bear on the immovable fluke chains to pry them adrift from the timber heads, and so low had the whale now settled that the submerged ends could not be at all approached, while every moment whole tons of ponderosity seemed added to the sinking bulk, and the ship seemed on the point of going over. Hold on, won't ye?" cried Stubb to the body. "Don't be in such a devil of a hurry to sink. By thunder, men, we must do something, or go for it. No use in prying there. Avast, I say, with your handspikes, and run one of ye for a special prayer book and a penknife, and cut the big chains." "Knife, aye, aye," cried Queequeg, and seizing the carpenter's heavy hatchet, he leaned out of a porthole, and, steel to iron, began slashing at the largest fluke chains. But at a few strokes, full of sparks were given, when the exceeding strain unaffected the rest. With a terrible snap, every fastening went adrift, the ship righted, and the carcass sank. Now, with this occasionally inevitable sinking of the recently killed sperm whale is a very curious thing, nor has any fisherman yet adequately accounted for it. Usually the dead sperm whale floats with great buoyancy, with its side or belly considerably elevated above the surface. If the only whales that thus sank were old, meager, and broken-hearted creatures, their pads of lard diminished, and all their bones heavy and rheumatic, then you might think with some reason assert that this sinking is caused by an uncommon specific gravity in the fish so sinking, consequent upon its absence of buoyant matter in him. But it is not so, for young whales, in their highest health, are swelling with noble aspirations, prematurely cut off in the warm flush and May of life, with all their panting lard about them. Even these brawny, buoyant heroes do sometimes sink. Be it said, however, that the sperm whale is far less liable to do this accident than other species. Where one of that sort go down, 20 right whales do. This difference in the species is no doubt imputable to no small degree to the greater quantity of bone in the right whale. His Venetian blinds alone sometimes weigh more than a ton, from the encumbrance of the sperm whale is wholly free. But there are instances where, after the lapse of many hours or several days, the sunken whale again rises, more buoyant than in life. But the reason of this is obvious. Gases are generated in him, he swells to a prodigious magnitude and becomes a sort of animal balloon. A line of battleship could hardly keep him under. And for the shore whaling on soundings among the bays of New Zealand, when a right whale gives a token of sinking, they fasten buoys to him, with plenty of rope, so that when the body has gone down, they know where to look for it when it shall have ascended again. It was not long after the sinking of the body that a cry was heard from the Pequod's mastheads, announcing that the Jungfrau was again lowering her boats, though the only spout in sight was that of a finback, belonging to the species of uncapturable whales because of its incredible power of swimming. Nevertheless, the finback spout is so similar to the sperm whales that, by unskillful fishermen, it is often mistaken for it. And consequently, Derek and all his hosts were now in valiant chase of this unnearable brute. The Virgin, crowding all sail, made for her 4 young keels, and thus they all disappeared far to the leeward. Still in bold, hopeful chase. Oh, many are the finbacks and many are the Derricks, my friend. This is the end of chapter 81, and my, was it a long one. Bunch of things in it, bunch of things that are really kind of cool. One of the things was talked about taking coals to Newcastle. Now, Newcastle is a name of a couple of towns. One in Scotland, or Northern England, I'm not sure where it lies on the side of the line. Another one in Australia. The one in Australia was the name for the one in Great Britain. The one in Great Britain is famous for making coal. There were a whole bunch of coal mines there. And the story goes that, because this whole town is full of coal mines, all they export is coal. So they mine coal, they ship it out. They mine coal, they ship it out. So the phrase became taking coals to Newcastle as something that's just doesn't make any sense at all. As I was saying, taking coals to Newcastle. Newcastle was a place famous for exporting coal. And there was a story about somebody hearing the idiom and deciding, hey, taking coal to Newcastle must be a great idea. And so he had a ship, he loaded it up with coal, and he sailed it to Newcastle. But because of a strike, because of other oddities, he ended up making out like a bandit, because they actually needed coal in Newcastle at that point, because there had been a miners' strike, no coal had been dug out of the ground, all of the stuff that had been dug out of the ground had been shipped off. So when he came to Newcastle with coal, they were like, we need it to heat our houses. So, coal to Newcastle is one of those things. That's kind of interesting. Talked about the body of the whale swelling up after it died. So they could mark the whale and put a buoy on it and hang out for a few days. And as a whale is there, as the whale dies, the various openings at the mouth and other end close. And the bacteria in the gut keep going. And because the immune system is shut down, because the immune system is shut down, because the whale is dead, all of the cells lining the gut die. And as the cells lining the gut die, they become food for the bacteria in the gut. And so the gut bacteria work anaerobically. And anaerobically means without air. Now the thing is that most anaerobic bacteria get their energy by making methane, CH4. So 1 carbon, 4 hydrogens arranged in a tetrahedron. Anyway, so the bacteria start breaking down the whale. And as the bacteria break down the whale, they make methane. And so the methane builds up. And if you ever see a road-killed animal, or if you see an animal that's dead and just kind of lying there for a few days, after a few days, they get this really sort of bloated appearance. And they can actually explode. It's like they burst, and it's blood and guts and gore, and it's just nasty and the foulest smell you can imagine. Now, this whale wasn't doing well when they caught it. He only had 1 fin. So, like you have 2 arms, whales have 2 fins, 1 on each side. So he only had 1 fin. Talked about an abscess-looking thing that had a rusted harpoon in it. That was how old? Who knows how old? There was a stone harpoon in it. And, he's like, who uses stone harpoons? And who uses stone harpoons? Because nobody uses stone harpoons because they break and they're heavier and nice steel, good sharp edge. They found a stone harpoon in him, and Ishmael's like,
Okay.
this thing's got to be 200 years old. It probably wasn't 200 years old because 200 years is far longer than sperm whales live. And finally, they talked about, in the German boat, the Jungfrau, literally young woman. So, young woman, virgin, same sort of thing. So, it's the Jungfrau. And that's a sign of the captain's inexperience. Because here they are, they've been out as long as the Pequod has. The Pequod's taken down 2 whales. Taken down 2 whales, had opportunities at more. So they've been out at least as long as the Pequod has.
So what?
They haven't caught anything. And here they are going after a fin whale. Now, I told you before how the sperm whale is actually dives the 3rd deepest of any whale. 2 is the fin whale. So the fin whale dives even deeper.
Okay.
So they're chasing after a fin whale, and it's like, that thing's faster.
Okay.
It's just as long as the sperm whale, but it's faster and it dives deeper. The Pequod, they could barely catch sperm whales. They lost the boat. Flask's boat was knocked over. So they're down a boat. And
Okay.
here you have the Germans going after not only a whale that's an inferior catch in that it has less blubber, it doesn't have the rich spermaceti fluid in its forehead that the sperm whale has. And so here they are, they're chasing after something that's worth less, harder to catch. And it's like, you're really playing this on hard level.
Okay.
So here they are, they're chasing after it, and the Pequod is like, okay, well, we'll set a buoy on the sinking whale and come back and pick it up in a couple of days. But, yeah. Bunch of interesting things in this chapter.